I don't know if it's just me, but I always feel like January is usually a really good reading month. No hate for Nesta on this channel. Yeah, probably just going to go down as a book that I read. Hi lovelies! Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria and today's video is just going to be my January reading wrap up. So just going through all the books that I read in January, giving you my thoughts and feelings on whether I would recommend them. I don't know if it's just me, but I always feel like January is usually a really good reading month, and I think it's just because I keep all of the books that I was supposed to read last year, kind of all of my highly anticipated books that for whatever reason I just didn't get to before the end of the year. I always end up being really excited to pick those up in January. So I just think it's a lot of anticipated reads and releases that make January a really good reading month, and happy to say that this January was no different. Definitely found a few new favourites and reread some of my favourites as well, so all in all just had a really good reading month. So without further ado, let's just get into the wrap up. So firstly, I'll get the rereads out of the way. So the first reread I done was A Court of Silver Flames by Maas, and I'm reading this with my friends Selin and Maddie from bookstagram. I always link their channels below when I talk about that, but we basically have just reread the Maas universe. We read it once in preparation for House of Flame and Shadow, and then we're just reading it again for fun. We love kind of theorising and coming up with crazy ideas about what SJM is going to do with the series going forward and what the next books might be about. So if you don't know, A Court of Silver Flames is my favourite book in the ACOTAR series. I've always been a Nesta lover. No hate for Nesta on this channel. So I really highly anticipated reading this book when I was reading the series, and as I say, it was always one of my favourites. Absolutely gave a 5-star on my reread. That was my 4th reread of this book, so needless to say, it is one of my favourites. And then we reread House of Earth and Blood, which is the first book in the Crescent City series, and honestly, every time I reread this, I realise how much I love this book. I do think that this is very different from the other Maas series. It is obviously urban fantasy. There's a lot more of a kind of mystery, almost thriller aspect to it, and I definitely think just the dynamics between the characters are very different in this one as well, especially how this one starts. And yeah, I just really admire the intricate kind of storytelling within this one, and I do always say, even if you've tried one SJM series and you didn't enjoy it, definitely try the others because they're all so different. ACOTAR is obviously a lot more romanticy. Throne of Glass is more YA kind of high fantasy with a good subplot of romance in there as well, and this is definitely more urban fantasy with that kind of mystery thriller aspect in there as well. So all very different, but as I say, I do love them all. This is my 3rd reread of this one, so again, needless to say, both of those were 5 stars. Next up, I read the Arc of Immortal. So obviously this is the Fairy Loot edition, so I have got this since I read the Arc, but I had the Arc for quite some time and read it at the start of this month before this one was released. And this is by Selin and is set in the same world as her Daughter of the Moon Goddess series. So if you read that series, I definitely think you'll enjoy this one. In this one, we follow Liane, who is part of the mortal realm within this world, and her grandfather is the current ruler, but at the start of this story, he actually passes away, and Liane very much blames the gods or the immortals for that. And the immortals within this world do work with the ruler of the mortal kingdom to kind of keep them safe, and they've had a pact for however many years. However, as Liane blames them for her grandfather's death, she ends up kind of setting a revenge plot against them, and specifically against the god of war, who she ends up having to spend some time with at the start of this book. And in order for her to ascend to the throne, she has to go to the immortal lands to be kind of oathed in by the current queen of the immortals, and while she's there, that's when she has to stay with the god of war so that she can be oathed in, and the story kind of goes from there. And in this one, I did enjoy it. I wasn't really that invested in the romance in this one, and it's because it kind of follows a certain trope that just for me personally isn't my favourite, but I can't tell you the trope because that's a spoiler. But what I will say is I did really enjoy the writing in this. I enjoyed the lush world, and everything you kind of love from Daughter of the Moon Goddess is definitely in this one as well. I would say about Selin writing is, even though they're adult novels, they do very much read a lot more YA, so just be cautious of that whenever you're going into it. But for me, I just really enjoy the folklore and kind of the imagery and the whimsy that are present within these books. So I still ended up enjoying this one, even though I wasn't that invested in the romance, and I ended up rating this one 4 stars. Next up, I read Daisy Haites by Jessie Hastings, and this was me kind of giving this series a second chance. When I first read the Magnolia Parks book in summer last year, I was almost sure that this just wasn't going to be a series for me. I didn't enjoy the characters. They were all extremely toxic. You'll probably have heard of this series, that it's basically Gossip Girl mixed with Made in Chelsea, but basically a lot of toxic relationships between young people. Magnolia Parks is kind of the main character of the first book. However, we do have books that kind of follow the same timeline who follow Daisy Haites as the main character, and we see the story from her point of view. So as I say, when I read Magnolia Parks, I wasn't really that enamored by it, and I just thought it maybe wasn't for me. However, a lot of people did say that the first book is kind of unlikable within the series, and the series does get better as it kind of progresses. And for many people, if you're not a Magnolia girl, you will be a Daisy Haites girl. So I thought, I have all the books on my shelf, I might as well give this a go and see if it's something that I'm going to enjoy. And I'm happy to say that I did enjoy this a lot more. Still not a firm favourite, but I would say this landed more in the 3.75 to to 4-star, whereas Magnolia Parks was more kind of the 3 to 3.5, just because I couldn't root for any of the characters within that book. But within this book, I definitely did find myself rooting for the characters a lot more. I do think that this was filled with toxicity and morally grey characters, because within this one we're obviously following Daisy Haites, who is the sister to kind of a crime lord in London, and when she was very young she's seen her parents get murdered and he's kind of taken care of her for quite some time. So we're following Daisy, her brother, and kind of the group of friends that surround Magnolia and BJ are also surrounding Daisy and Julian as well. But yeah, as I say, very much toxic relationships, very much young people kind of trying to work out what their feelings mean, what they're trying to do. But I do think that these characters were much more likeable, and that meant I could enjoy kind of the toxicity, if that makes sense. And I was kind of rooting for them to be together. So definitely glad I read this, because as I say, I have all the books on my shelf and I was thinking that I was going to end up having to unhaul them because it just wasn't going to be a series for me. But this has definitely made me think that this may be something that I could enjoy. I do think it's quite bingeable, you know, even though they're not books that I'm giving 5 stars or anything. I did really want to know what happened in this. It did keep me engaged. I wasn't bored at any point, and I can read them pretty quickly as well. So it definitely has that going for it. I wouldn't say the prose in here is anything that I'm really that invested in. I know a lot of people really love Jessa Hastings' writing and her prose, but for me, for whatever reason, I don't really connect with it the way that some other people are, but it doesn't take away from my enjoyment of it. I'm still able to enjoy the story, and especially obviously this second book, which I enjoyed a lot more than the first one. So interested to see how I feel about the third book, because it does go back to following Magnolia, and there was kind of a bonus chapter in this that kind of put us back into Magnolia's world, and she already irritated me in that chapter. So be interested to see how I feel about that one and if I do enjoy it. But either way, glad I picked this one up, and as I say, it's kind of a 3.75 to 4-star for this one. Next up, I read arguably one of the most intimidating books on my current TBR, and that is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. And this is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series, which is a huge series, mainly because all of the books are over 1,000 pages. They're all huge. So this was on my 25 for 2025 list, and I thought, just bite the bullet within January, just get this off the TBR, find out if this is a series that I'm going to enjoy, and just kind of get it off my mind as a series that I need to start. And again, very glad to say that I did enjoy this one. This one is an epic high fantasy. It's very intricate in terms of the world building. We're in this kind of storm-ravaged kingdom called Roshar, which has kind of always been on the brink of war for the last however many years. Within it, we're following a warrior who has kind of fallen from his glory, a general who is seeing visions from the past and kind of trying to understand those, and then a scholar who is trying to help her family and seeking an opportunity to find this certain amulet that will help her and her family to kind of get back to their former glory. And as we follow the story along, the 3 storylines kind of converge. We're seeing people from different socio-political levels within this world and kind of how the war and current state of the world affects them, and we kind of see the 3 stories coming together and converging by the end of this. And I think with Brandon Sanderson's writing, what I really love about it is it's, as I say, really intricate and detailed and very well developed, but also quite easy to understand. It's not something that you're really going to have to kind of study to understand. While you're going through it, you may be confused about a few things, but I think that's done by design. For the most part, he's very good at kind of reminding you of the magic systems, reminding you of the political positions of people without it being too obvious. Within this, there was a little element of kind of whimsy that I wasn't expecting, in terms of, I think they were called like wood sprites or something like that. I can't quite remember the name of them, but there was a character in here who was kind of almost like a fairy, and in my mind I kept thinking of her as almost like Tinkerbell. So definitely a little element of whimsy there that kind of just added to the world building within this. And I do think that these are quite long to get through. You know, it's not a book that I can kind of just binge and read quite quickly. It is something that I do feel I need to give my full attention, because all of the detail in here definitely builds up to that overall picture. So even though I did enjoy it, I think there were a few slow moments kind of in the middle, and it did feel like it was dragging a little bit, but overall I do just really think that this is going to be a series I'm going to love. So first book, 4 stars in this one, but I'm really highly anticipating moving on to the next one. Next up, I read The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong, and this one again is one that I was highly anticipating after reading Blood over Brighthaven at the end of last year. Again, this is a bit more of a kind of high political fantasy. However, I would say that the magical elements in this were a lot less than I was expecting, but in this one we're following kind of a mother and a son, and a lot of the plot within this kind of centres around them and their family, but then also kind of the political climate of the world that they're living in, and maybe some of the secrets that the established government have been hiding from them for quite some time. They live in a world where basically they have been set as the protectors of the entire realm, hence they're called the Sword of Kaigen. And basically within this land, most of the people here are kind of trained to fight and to become soldiers and, as I say, be protectors of this land. One day a new family moved to the area to kind of help to modernise some of the telecommunications infrastructure there, and essentially the son within this, so his name is Mamoru, he is kind of told a few things that he can't quite believe because they differ very much from what everyone within this land believes, but that kind of starts him questioning things, and he asks his mother about it, and and that again then uncovers some of her history. She was married into this family and had kind of left her past behind to become a devoted mother and wife. And on the face of it, this is kind of a story about uncovering the lies that they have been told about their realm. However, for me, it was very much more a character study, and it was exploring themes of trauma, motherhood, regrets, family dynamics, and how life doesn't always end up being what you expect it to be, but you can learn to love the life that you have regardless of that. The main thing I loved about this was that M.L. Wong didn't shy away from any details. It was very visceral, it was very real. I really felt like I was there with the characters and feeling all of their emotions, and it really made me question my morality in terms of how I would react in certain situations, and kind of make me think, would I react in the same way? Would I be able to do that? What would I do to protect my family? So I've definitely checked some trigger warnings for this one, because there are quite a few things in here which could be quite triggering for some readers, but I do think that they were done in such a masterful way, and I just felt everything for these characters and I couldn't help but want them to succeed. I think if you read The Poppy War, you may like this one as well. It very much gave me those same vibes, so if that's a book that you enjoyed, or a book that you liked, I hate saying enjoy for those books because these are pretty heartbreaking, but if it's a book that you enjoyed and you did read, I think you'll like this one as well. But this one ended up at 4.75 stars, only because there were a few lagging moments within there that could have been cut a bit shorter, but overall I would say just highly recommend. Definitely put this on your TBR. Next up was my 5-star read for the month, and that was Out of the Woods by Hannah Bonham Young, and this is kind of a companion novel to Out on a Limb, which I read last year and also gave 5 stars. There's just something about Hannah Bonham Young's writing in these romances that is just so refreshing for me. I absolutely love them. I love the banter, I love the style of the writing, I love the relationships between the two characters, and yeah, something about her writing just really works for me. So after reading Out on a Limb, I saw that Hannah Bonham Young was going to do a story about Sarah and Caleb, who were kind of the side characters in that story. So I was really excited to see when this was coming out, and thankfully I did get an ARC for this one, but obviously I've bought my physical copy. This is a copy I got from The Works, and it does have some really pretty sprayed edges, but I was really happy to get an ARC for this one because I was highly anticipating it, and as I said, it was 5 stars, so obviously I did enjoy this one. But in this one we're following Sarah and Caleb, who have been together for quite some time. They have always been kind of the pinnacle relationship. People look at them and think, you know, they're so happy and everything's going really well for them, and one day Sarah basically feels like she doesn't really know who she is outside of this relationship. You know, her identity has very much been molded by this relationship with Caleb, and even though she's very happy with him, she kind of feels like she's in a bit of a life slump, and in order to try and help them to kind of reignite their relationship, reignite their own kind of personal values and priorities, and to kind of get them thinking about what they really want in life, they end up going on this kind of couples retreat up into the woods to camp and to reignite their love and to kind of rediscover who they are as people. And this was just, again, absolutely beautifully done. I found myself relating a lot with Sarah's character and with Caleb as well, and I just think as someone who has been in a relationship for a very long time, I could really relate to what they were feeling and how they were feeling, and how you really do have to work at keeping your relationship at the same level as it was when you first met, and how you do kind of evolve as a couple, you know, as individuals. You're not the same person you were when you met them, you know, especially if you've been together as long as I have with my husband, coming up to 19 years now. You're definitely not the same person you were when you met, so I just really loved that kind of exploration of those feelings within this, and it did make me cry. There was a scene at the end that made me cry, so I couldn't give it anything less than 5 stars. Highly recommend. Next up is a romantasy that I've been really anticipating, and that is A Kiss of Iron by Clara Sager. So seen quite a few people reading this and saying that they really loved it, and it's kind of one of the best romantasys they'd read in a while, so I was really excited to pick this one up. In this one we follow Kat, who is a penniless noblewoman who is basically on the verge of losing everything until one day she's asked to be a lady's maid for the Queen. However, when she gets there, she's very quickly pulled into kind of the political intrigue of the court and asked to spy on a deadly fae who is known as the Queen's Shadow. So in order to try and get information from him, she tries to seduce him and kind of blurs the lines between the relationship with them, and the story kind of goes from there. Going into this one, I was expecting to get a really fun, romance-forward romantasy, and that's definitely what I got. I really enjoyed the tension between the characters, and I would say that this one is quite spice-heavy, so just in case that's something you're not into, just a bit of a heads up on this one. I don't mind it personally, but as I say, just a heads up. But I did still enjoy kind of the build-up of their relationship as the story went on. It didn't feel like it was insta-love or anything, but there definitely was a little bit of insta-lust in this one. There isn't really a lot of world building in this one. There was a little bit of an info dumpy kind of chapter where we were told about the Fae realm, but in terms of the world that we're living in here, there wasn't a lot of world building, but I do know that there is a kind of companion series that comes before this one, which is set in the same world, so perhaps a lot of the world building is done in that one, and that's why I'm kind of missing that component with this, but it was something that was very noticeable while I was reading it. I would have loved to have the male character basket Sebastian's POV throughout this, but by the end of it you do kind of realise why you didn't have it. I do think for me personally, just with everything that was going on, I would have enjoyed maybe a little bit more of that. I think the second book will have more from his point of view, as we did get a chapter of that at the end of this because there was quite a big twist and a cliffhanger at the end of this one, so hoping that the second one will give us a bit more of his POV. But I think with this one overall it was a really fun read. It wasn't something that I think I'm going to remember for a long time. I think in terms of the series, I think the books will get better and better as I read on, but for this first book I ended up rating a 3.5 because yes, it was enjoyable, it was fast paced, I enjoyed it for the most part, but if I didn't read the rest of the series I feel like it could be a little bit forgettable. Next up I read Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and after reading Gideon the Ninth in, I think it was the end of November, start of December, and around that time, I was really excited to pick this one up because it kind of reignited my love for sci-fi genre and really made me think that it is something that I should be exploring more. So I was highly anticipating this sequel because I really loved that first book and it was completely different than anything I'd read before. I did say in my review for that one that the storyline was completely confusing. For a lot of the story you didn't really understand why we were doing what we were doing or where the story was going to go, and if at all possible this was more confusing. I was reading a lot of this and honestly I was kind of thinking, do I need to go back and read Gideon the Ninth? Have I missed something? What is going on here? And honestly up until around 80% that is exactly how I felt, but yet again with Tamsin Muir, her writing is unlike anything that I've ever read before, and by the end of it everything came together. You kind of understood what was happening, you understood why the narrative had kind of changed from the first book to the second book, and it all made sense. But then we do have an epilogue in this that kind of blows that out of the water again and you end up completely confused about where the story is going to go. So I'll be highly anticipating the third book in this one. Not sure I'm going to understand anything that's going on, but I do enjoy the journey and getting there. So I ended up rating this one 4 stars because a lot of it was written in second person POV, so a lot of it was you're standing there, you see a figure, you do this, you do that, and it's just a preference thing. For me personally, it kind of took me out of the story a little bit, but if you're not bothered by that type of writing or that point of view, then I don't think it'll be an issue for you. It was just, it took me a little bit longer to get into this one because there were so many chapters in that POV, but once I got used to it, I definitely got into the story a lot more and ended up really enjoying it. And as I say, it's just a series that I've never really experienced anything like this before. Yes, it's set in space, but it's not kind of the sci-fi that I would be used to or sci-fi that I had read before. It wasn't very dry. It's really, really funny. You really get to love the characters within this. And even though there is quite a lot of plot going on, I mean, there's a lot of plot. A lot of it I probably don't understand, but really for me, the characters are what make this so lovable, and the reason I'll probably keep reading the series, even though I'm confused a lot of the time, I will keep reading it because I just absolutely love these characters and I want to see what happens. So highly anticipating the third book in this one. Next up was my book club pick for the book club I have with my mum and my sisters, and we read The Guilty Husband by Stephanie D. Carolus. So a lot of the book club picks that we have tend to be outside my comfort zone because my mum and my sisters don't really read the same genres as me. They don't really read a lot of fantasy, so I actually really enjoy being able to kind of branch out of what I normally read to read something along with them that's kind of more on their vibe. So it is a mystery thriller, and this one kind of follows a man who is basically the CEO of this big technical corporation. At the start of the story we find out that an intern in his company has actually been murdered, but we also find out that he was having an affair with her, and we kind of just watch the story unravel, trying to figure out who done it, why she would have been targeted, mysteries around her as well. And I think this one is, if you have a day just to sit and read something that's quite bingeable, you can read this. I think for me it was a little bit predictable. I called who the culprit was within the first 2 chapters. And I'm not really a thriller reader, so I don't think that it's one of those things where I've read so many that I kind of understood where the narrative was going. I think it was pretty predictable. So I still enjoyed it. I still thought the writing was good. I thought the suspense was good. I was kind of thinking at one point, oh, maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe my prediction is wrong, but it ended up being who I called it to be. So if you like thrillers and if you read them quite often, I do think you'll find this one pretty predictable. I ended up rating it 3 to 3.5 stars, but not because it was bad, just because I do think for that genre, there needs to be more mystery. There needs to be more shock factor within the book for me to enjoy it. And as I say, even though the writing was pretty good, I enjoyed the narrative, it was so predictable that it wasn't a surprise when we got to the end and I found out who the culprit was. So yeah, probably just going to go down as a book that I read. And then the next 2 books I read, I have a vlog. I'll link that in the comments below. But the first one is Jade City by Fonda Lee. And again, this is kind of a more urban fantasy that I've been anticipating reading for quite some time. A lot of people hail it as one of their favourites, so I'd heard nothing but great things about this one. And for me personally, I just think I wasn't anticipating exactly what this story would be, so it did take a little bit of the enjoyment away from me, but I do also think I was in a slump when I was reading this and the next book that I picked up. That may have impacted my enjoyment of this, but this story kind of follows two families within this land where Jade basically gives a warrior the ability to strengthen his power, and if you're a Jade wielder, you are basically revered within this town. Now, the two families who have been managing the Jade for quite some time used to have a good alliance, however, over the years that has broken up, and they don't really work as closely together as they used to. In the city, there is a new drug that is emerging that kind of gives anyone who takes it the ability to wield Jade, but the effects of that on a person are really strenuous, and one of the Jade families within this town are trying to stop that as they know how dangerous it will be. However, the other does want to try and sell this to foreign lands to harness their power within the kingdom, kind of come out on top in this political kind of landscape between the two warring families. And I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed kind of the dynamic between the two families, but mainly what this story is about is the dynamic of the family that we're following and kind of how they fit into that family dynamic. There were a few twists and turns in here, definitely a few things that shocked me, and I really enjoyed the writing style as well. However, the plot was kind of dragging for me a little. I didn't feel myself really connected with the characters, and I do think that a big part of this story is connecting with those characters and really feeling for them, because if you don't have that, I don't think it has the impact that it should have. So I do think that I was in a slump with this one because on paper this has everything that I should love. However, my reading experience of it was a little bit dry. It just didn't really intrigue me the way I hoped it would. I do think that the magical side of this was quite minimal, and it kind of read more like a literary fiction with magical realism for me, which again just maybe wasn't what I was anticipating, so that could have gave me a little bit of a jarring feel when I started this one. I am still going to continue on with the series because, as I say, I really love the writing style of this one, and I do want to see kind of what all the hype is about. I do think I'll be able to decide with the second book if this is something for me. I do think I'm going to read it just physically as well because I wasn't a huge fan of the narration for the audiobook of this one, so a few different factors that may have impacted my enjoyment of this one, but I think overall I ended up rating this one 3.5. I think the structure and the plot and the writing style was really good, but just didn't kind of capture me the way I hoped it would. And then lastly, I read the new release, which is Onyx Storm, and this was kind of forced on me because I put a hold on Libby for the audiobook, anticipating that I wouldn't get it for a few weeks because I was like 50th in the queue, but within a day, I think they must have got more copies or something like that, I ended up getting the audiobook. So I thought, you know what, I've got it on my Libby app, I might as well just listen to it. So you likely don't need me to introduce this series, but just in case you haven't heard of it, it's basically following this military school where students are there to kind of learn to ride dragons, and you're kind of chosen by your dragon, and there's a whole lot of political intrigue in here, but it is kind of also very heavily weighed by the romance in here between two of the students from that academy. So don't want to give anything away just in case anyone hasn't heard about it and hasn't read who the kind of end couple end up being. But this one I was kind of apprehensive going into because I really enjoyed Fourth Wing. I think it was really fun. It was the perfect pace. Wasn't anything new within the fantasy romance realm, however, I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the pace of that one. Iron Flame, I didn't hate it as much as other people seem to have hated it. I do think it was a bit long. I do think it could have been edited a lot more, but I think it was just the pressure from the publishing teams to kind of get a new book out with the hype of Fourth Wing that kind of really hurt that one. But in terms of the story, I do think it was kind of a solid second book within a series, and I kind of think the same with this one. I think this was a solid third book within a series. I don't think there was any filler in here, but there was a lot of information kind of clunkily put together and given to us to kind of broaden out this world. I do think that it could have been done a little bit better than it was. I think the first 40% was pretty repetitive, and I was kind of losing interest. I was very close to putting it down and kind of soft DNFing it for a while. However, I decided to continue because I did have the audiobook, and I'm glad I did because I do think that the second half of this was much better paced, had much better plot progression, and I ended up really enjoying it. So I think overall I ended up giving this one a 4-star. It probably sits more between a 3.5 and a 4-star, but I do think it's a solid kind of interim book within a series. I don't think it was just a filler book. I don't think it was something that they just brought out to kind of keep the momentum. I do think there was a lot of information in here that kind of progresses the story and opens the story to widening out to different parts of the world that Rebecca Yarros is trying to build, but definitely wasn't a 5-star. Don't think this series is kind of a 5-star series for me now. I know I loved the first book, but overall this is probably like a 4-star series, but we'll see what the next books bring out when she does bring those out. But yeah, this was the last read of January. So that's everything I read in January. As I say, I think I ended up having a really good reading month. I think there was quite a good mix of kind of genres and authors in there, and as I say, quite a few favourites that I've ended up finding and new series that I'm really excited to continue in. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts and feelings on them, if you kind of agree with mine, or if you have a different opinion, definitely let me know. Especially let me know if you've read Jade City, if you do think that the rest of the books get better. I'm really intrigued to see what you think about that as well. And let me know what your favourite read was of January, and if it's something that I should be adding to my TBR. If you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I post 2 videos per week, and it's videos like this, so monthly wrap-ups, book recommendation videos, TBR videos, book hauls, come shopping with me videos, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!